Okay, we're continuing on in Daniel. And remember the reason we're in Daniel, because we're trying to understand Revelation. And you're like, well, why don't you just teach Revelation? You know, hey, it's got tons of stuff in there. You could teach it. But you got to use the Old Testament prophecy, not just Daniel. All Old Testament prophecy is prophesied because it has to come true. And some of that has come true, obviously, and some hasn't. Some things, like we gave the example early on of Joseph in Genesis 20, where he gives a prophecy and interprets the prophecy and is fulfilled in 3 days. That's the kind of prophecies I like. Because, I want to see the beginning, middle, and end. Beginning, middle, and end, beginning, middle, and end. But in most prophecy, it gives you the prophecy, and then there's this time lag. Sometimes it's for years, hundreds of years, or a couple thousand years. Well, it's hard when it's a couple thousand years, because you're like, well, gosh, how long does it take? Why would you tell us 2,000 years ahead of time? Well, like I always say, I don't get to decide, the Lord does, and that's the way he explains it, and so I accept it. So last time we went over Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. So at the top of the page here, I give a brief statement. Because sometimes I'm into these books and I'm going really fast and I'm explaining this and this and this and this and that and that and that and that. And I'm talking really fast, you know I do. And then at the end, everybody's going, let me see. Oh yeah, I kind of forget that part where he connected this and that. That's why I give you the notes. Because if you get bogged down and you're not sure exactly what I said, and I didn't explain things maybe in the way that you remember, then you go back to the notes and you slowly read through them and try to understand that way. And let's say you still don't quite understand. You can always send me an email. If there's time after class, if you have that time, you can talk to me then. Or some other way, I'd be glad to meet with you and try to explain those things. And what goes along with that is all the different views. Because you go like, well, I heard it means this. And then somebody else go, no, it means this. And no, it means this. And they're like, well, that guy has a doctorate and he said it. Well, then I could show you 5 other doctorates, people that have doctorates that said the opposite. So having a great education in the Bible is wonderful. It's wonderful, but it's not a guarantee of having the wrong answer. Because remember, if there's 2 views, either one's right and the other's wrong, or this one's right and the other's wrong, and what's the third one? They're both wrong, right? So you'll have to listen to those people about some of those views. But anyway, so in Daniel 2 last time, we talked about these 4 empires, or at Daniel 2, last time. And in brief, it was the statue, remember, of the 4 empires, with the 4th empire of iron and the 10 iron toe kingdoms were crushed by the stone Jesus when he comes, and the Lord's everlasting kingdom will come. So that is a nutshell of what happened in chapter 2. And if you want more detail, you have to look at last time's notes. Then also in the same lesson, I went over Daniel 7, and that was about the 4 beasts or empires, with the 4th empire with 10 horned kings who will arise, and then a 11th king will arise and destroy 3 of the 10 kings, speak against God and persecute the saints, but will be destroyed. Okay? So that in a nutshell was chapter 7. And then moving down in the middle of the page, there's the outline of Daniel, which we had last week. So this outline is based on chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, okay? Showing you what basically is in each one of those chapters. But now at the bottom of the page, when I studied Revelation, I did it in 2015 too. I did it in a home Bible study. I found out the chapters aren't in chronological order. Well, I want them to be. I want them to be in chronological order, but they're not. You read all the scholars, you read the commentaries, and most of them, if they get into any detail or not, will mention this. So notice the order there. I'm not going to talk about every little detail of it, but you notice the first ones that I have in lavender color or purple color there about Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. So all of those chapters are about Babylon, okay, the purple ones. And then the last 5 there are about Darius the Mede, or the Persian Empire. Now, think of this for a second. Remember the statue that had the head of the statue? The first kingdom was gold, Babylon. The second kingdom was silver, the Medes and the Persians. So in Daniel, the first 2 parts of the statues are being revealed. Have already revealed in Daniel's time, right? Well, Daniel's still alive, okay? Why do we care about that? Well, that does show that prophecy is fulfilled, right? So if those prophecies are fulfilled about the first 2 parts of the statue, do you think the last 2 parts of the statue are going to be fulfilled? Yes, for the same reason, right? The same prophecy. If it's right in the first part of the prophecy, why would it be right in the rest? And all prophecy must be fulfilled, like I keep saying over and over and over again, because it's from the Lord. And you have to trust what's from the Lord as revealed in his word through his prophets. Okay? And it's because a lot of times people get in there, well, that was prophesied, but it probably won't come true, or there's no evidence it's going to come true. And then they either ignore it totally or change what's going to occur in the future. And that's when you get into trouble, when you try to change those things. Let's go to the next page. Does someone read Daniel chapter 9, verses 1 and 2? Someone volunteer to do those first 2 verses? Go ahead.
In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus of Media, who was made king of the kingdom of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the book the number of years which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years.
Okay, so Darius the Mede, as part of the Medo-Persian Empire, was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans. Do you understand? The kingdom of the Chaldeans is the Babylonian kingdom. The kingdom was conquered by the Medo-Persians, conquered by Cyrus, the king of the Persians. Okay? And so when it was conquered, they moved in and started ruling that area, the Chaldeans, and started ruling there instead of the Babylonians, because the Babylonians are off of the picture. So he started ruling over the kingdom of the Chaldeans by the Persian king Cyrus the Great, who conquered Babylon and Belshazzar in Daniel chapter 5. Now, if we were to read Daniel chapter 5, remember at the end, that's the scene where the writing's on the wall and all that. And then it says right towards the end, and that very night is when the Persians came in. And it doesn't tell all the details of the story, but if you read up in history, what happened is when Belshazzar was in the big, it wasn't a castle, but it was the big kingdom fortress with walls so wide that many chariots could ride side by side across the wall. It was so magnificent. It was so powerful. It was so big and so, no one could ever break into it, right? No one could. And then underneath the wall was the river that ran through the city underneath, and they all got the water from there and everything. So they had water, they had the fortress. So Belshazzar's having a party when he's being attacked. He's having a party. And then the writing on the wall comes. And guess what happens? The Persians block up the river and run underneath the wall and go in and conquer the whole city and kill everybody. Take over. It's fun to read that part of history if you're interested into it. So moving down the page, the prophecy of Jeremiah of the 70 years of desolation. So in Jeremiah 25, it says, this whole land of Israel will be a desolation and a horror, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. So before the exile, Daniel prophesies of the exile, okay? Then when 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, declares the Lord, for their iniquity in the land of the Chaldeans, and I will make it an everlasting desolation. Jeremiah prophesies beforehand that the land of Israel will be desolate for 70 years. Also that Israel will serve Babylon for 70 years. Look, all these things happened. It's amazing, right? Also that the Lord would punish the king of Babylon, the Babylons, and their land for their sin. So Jeremiah ahead of time, before the exile, says what's going to happen. And then it happens. And then after it happens, then the Babylons are going to be destroyed. And that's what happened in history, okay? So Jeremiah can be trusted also. Moving down the page, the reason for the 70-year desolation of Jerusalem. What is the reason for it? 2 Chronicles 36 tells us this. Those of Israel who had escaped from the sword, meaning Nebuchadnezzar, carried away to Babylon, and they were servants to him and his sons until the rule of the king of Persia. So Chronicles is looking back on what happened, okay? Because Chronicles at the end of the Old Testament. Okay, it's written by Ezra. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land of Israel had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days of its desolation, it kept Sabbath until 70 years were complete. Okay. So those of Israel who had been taken to Babylon were to be servants to Nebuchadnezzar and his sons. This serving was to continue until the rule of the kingdom of Persia, when Persia conquers Babylon. Oh, we just talked about that, didn't we? Persia's king, Cyrus the Great, conquers Babylon and Belshazzar in chapter 5 of Daniel, and Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. So Belshazzar was Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. So every 7 years, 1 year Sabbath to 70 Sabbaths, or 49 years of Sabbath missed, so 490 years or 70 years. So basically what happened, 490 years, Israel didn't acknowledge the Sabbath or have a Sabbath year for 490 years, okay? So finally the Lord said, that's enough, okay? You have to go and make up for those years that you did celebrate of those 490 years, okay? So if there's one every 7 years, then you take 490 and divide by 7, you see there's 70 Sabbath years you didn't celebrate, so therefore you have to go into exile. Why? So they could celebrate, so the land of Israel, could celebrate those 70 years of Sabbath rest. You see? It was to make up for that. And of course, this 490 years is critical to this prophecy that we're going to be getting to here shortly. So what was the intended outcome of the 70 years of desolation of Jerusalem? And Jeremiah 29 tells us this. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years have been completed, they will be completed, I will visit you and fulfill my good word to you to bring you back to this place. So after 70 years of exile, the Lord intends to bring Israel back to the land, back to their land of Israel. And Jeremiah prophesied, like Moses, that the Lord will fulfill my good word to Israel to bring them back to this place. So Israel will live in the land after the 70-year exile, but Israel will not possess the land. This is critical to understand how that works. Because I'd rather that they just come back and possess the land. But if they possess the land, then they have a kingdom, and they're not under the authority of some other kingdom. But Israel's always under the authority of some other kingdom. And people say, well, at the time of Maccabees, they weren't. And I'm like, well, yeah, kind of. But really, they were under the Greeks at that time. But they were not independent for years and years and years, almost 2,000 years, right? Until 1948, when they got their independence and all that. You could talk about how they have that their independence there. But still, even though they have their independence now, they haven't fulfilled all the things we're going to be talking about this morning with Daniel. But Israel will possess the land at the second coming of Christ more than 2,600 years later, there at the bottom of the page. This was promised by Jeremiah and Moses, both, and Amos and Hosea in those verses. Let's go to the next page. Daniel's response and prayer for the completion of the 70 years of desolation in Jerusalem. Someone want to read those verses 3 through 14? It's a lot of verses to read, but verses 3 through 14 in chapter 9.
Then I turned my face to the Lord God, seeking him by prayer and for mercy, with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. I prayed to the Lord my God and made confession, saying, O Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. We have sinned and done wrong and acted wickedly and rebelled, turning aside from your commandments and rules. We have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, and to all the people of the land. To you, O Lord, belongs righteousness, but to us open shame, as this day, to the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and to all Israel, those who are near and those who are far away, in all the lands to which you have driven them, because of the treachery that they have committed against you. To us, O Lord, belongs open shame, to our kings, to our princes, and to our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To the Lord our God belong mercy and forgiveness, for we have rebelled against him, and have not obeyed the voice of the Lord our God by walking in his laws, which he set before us by his servants the prophets. All Israel has transgressed your law and turned aside, refusing to obey your voice. And the curse and the oath that are written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured out upon us, because we have sinned against him. He has confirmed his words, which he spoke against us and against our rulers who ruled us, by bringing us a great calamity. For under the whole heaven there has not been anything like what has been done against Israel. As it's written in the law of Moses, all this calamity has come upon us, yet we have not entreated the favor of the Lord our God, turning from our iniquities and gaining insight by your truth. Therefore the Lord has kept ready the calamity and brought it upon us. For the Lord our God is righteous in all the work that he has done, and we have not obeyed his voice.
This is the chapter chronology that we talked about earlier. By the way, any of these I can make into a simple chart as a JPEG image, and you guys can have it if you like. Okay. Okay, so there on this chart is I tried to summarize the whole prayer. Now, what's really good about this prayer, if you ever said to yourself, I really don't know how to pray. I'm not very good at it. I kind of don't know the words to say. Read this over a number of times and look at all the things what he does. He not only prays, but he does supplications. In my version, it says he prayed in supplications in verse 3. Supplications are humbly begging, okay? And he's talking about confession in prayer. He talks about all of these things within prayer that are good ways for us to pray, because it's a good example of prayer because it's immediately answered. So Daniel confesses his and all Israel's sin and admits Israel's curse and calamity. Daniel associated himself with the sins of the people, with the nation of Israel. He approaches God on the basis of his covenant keeping with Israel. Does God keep his covenants with Israel? Yes. And in the New Testament it says, all covenants belong to Israel, Paul says, okay, in chapter 9. He prays and confesses Israel's sin, confesses Israel has not listened to the Lord's prophets, confesses shame belongs to all Israel, confesses that Israel has rebelled, not obeyed the Lord's prophets. Oh, he confesses what they did wrong, okay? Confesses all Israel has transgressed your law, turned aside, not obeying your voice, admits the cursed promise has been poured out on Israel, admits the Lord's confirmed great calamity has brought on Israel, admits the great calamity has not caused Israel to turn to the Lord, admits the Lord has kept the calamity in store and brought it on Israel. The last one's pretty interesting. Lord stores it up, right? Lord stores up what he's going to do with those who sin. And then at some point, when he decides, then he takes care of that sin. So let's go to the next page. Okay, someone want to read some more? There's more of Daniel's prayer here. So someone want to read verses 15 through 19. More of Daniel's prayer.
And
Go ahead.
now, O Lord, our God, who brought your people out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand and have made a name for yourself. As at this day we have sinned, we have done wickedly. O Lord, according to all your righteous acts, let your anger and your wrath turn away from your city Jerusalem, your holy hill, because of our sins and for the iniquities of our fathers. Jerusalem and your people have become a byword among all who are around us. Now, therefore, our God, listen to the prayer of your servant and to his pleas for mercy. And for your own sake, O Lord, make your face to shine upon your sanctuary, which is desolate.
Two more verses, yeah.
O God, incline your ear and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolation in the city that is called by your name. For we do not present our pleas before you because of our righteousness, but because of your great mercy. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, pay attention and act. Delay not for your own sake, O my God, because your city and your people are called by your name.
Okay. So Daniel continues in this long prayer for his people, for Jerusalem, and for the sanctuary, like the title says at the top of the page. This is critical. When you pray specifically for specific things, your desire is for the Lord to specifically answer you about those things, right? And that's what's going to happen. So Daniel prayed for the Lord's anger and wrath to be turned away so Israel could be restored. Daniel prayed for restoration of the Lord's people Israel, remembering how the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt. You know, Lord, like you brought us out of Egypt, bring us out of exile too. Both of those. Do that. That's what Daniel's praying. He prayed for restoration of the Lord's city, Jerusalem, the Lord's holy mountain, and the Lord's desolate sanctuary or temple. Why would he pray for those? Well, he's 600 miles away from Jerusalem. It was destroyed. Remember when Nebuchadnezzar came in and destroyed it in those 3 sessions in 605 and 597 and 586 BC. And we're years later, towards the end of the 70-year exile. So Daniel's wanting the city to be restored and the temple to be restored so they could get back to their normal life. Daniel's prayer about the Lord's people and the Lord's city, Jerusalem, was answered. Okay? Was answered in 20 through 27. And then in summation, I'm going to read Daniel 9:24 here ahead of time because we're going to go through it further. This is the answer to this prayer and is in 9:24. 70 weeks have been decreed by the Lord for Daniel's people and for Daniel's holy city, Jerusalem, to finish the transgression, to make an end to sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and anoint the most holy place. So as we'll see, when we get to that point, this is Gabriel talking and explaining to him the decree from God dealing with the prayer that we just read. Moving down, this is about the Lord's response to Daniel's prayer to give him insight and understanding. Oh, now when you pray and you don't know how it's going to work out, you want insight and understanding how it's going to work out, don't you? That's the point, right? So I'm going to read this one, Daniel 9:20 through 23. Now, while I, Daniel, was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel and presenting my supplication, humbly begging, before the Lord my God in behalf of the holy mountain of my God, or he read the holy hill, okay, which is Mount Zion in Jerusalem. While I, Daniel, was still speaking in prayer, then the man, Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. He, Gabriel, gave me instruction and talked with me and said, "O Daniel, I have come forth to give you insight and understanding." That's why Gabriel came. That's a key point or key phrase to remember there. At the beginning of your supplications, the command was issued, and I, Gabriel, have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. So give heed to the message and gain understanding of the vision. That's the kind of answer to prayer I like. Okay? At the beginning of his prayer, at the beginning of his supplication, Gabriel sent out. Man, he's on his way. He's down to answer the prayer and appear before Daniel. Okay? He doesn't actually go that way, but anyway, I'm just being silly. But anyway, it's the whole point is you get your prayers answered that quickly. That's kind of neat. And before you finish your sentence, the Lord already knows what you're going to say and responds to it. That is an amazing thing, okay, that Daniel shows. So there at the bottom, Daniel is praying on behalf of the holy mountain of my God. While Daniel was still praying, the angel came to give Daniel insight and understanding. Wow, before he finished praying. Let's move on. Gabriel came to answer Daniel's prayer about his people, Israel, and Jerusalem, and the temple. Remember the 3 things he prayed about? He wanted to give him answers. Daniel came to give Daniel insight and understanding about the holy mountain, meaning Mount Zion. Came to tell Daniel a message so he could understand the vision. Later, Daniel is sent from God by Mary to announce she will have a son named Jesus. So this is the same Gabriel that later on appears to Mary. 9:24, the 70-week decree. 70 weeks have been decreed. This is Gabriel talking. When you say it's decreed, the assumption is it's by the Lord. For your people. For Daniel's people. Who's Daniel's people? Israel. Okay? And for your holy city. Daniel's holy city is Jerusalem. To do what? To finish the transgression, to make an end to sin, to make an atonement for iniquity, to bring into everlasting righteousness, seal up vision and prophecy, and anoint the most holy place in the sanctuary. Now we're going to go into those in a few minutes. Question 1, in 924, who's the decree for? The 70 weeks have been decreed by the Lord for your people, for Daniel's people, Israel. And for Daniel's holy city, Jerusalem, the 70 weeks are about the nation of Israel. The prayer was about that. The answer's about that. The decree's about that. Okay? Question 2. How long is the decree for? Who is the decree for? And who is the decree from? We just want to ask those questions. We want to make sure we understand. The decree is 70 weeks long, and the decree for Daniel's people in Daniel's city, Jerusalem, and the decree is from the Lord through his angel Gabriel. Question 3, how long is the 70 weeks? Is it 70 times 7 days or 490 days? I mean, you got to ask that question, right? When someone says something's a week long, you always say it's 7 days, right? So you got to at least deal with that. You got to say, what does that mean? So the answer, week means 7 days in the context of Daniel 10:23. So we're in 9, but if you had your Bibles open to chapter 10, which is just a few verses after all this, it does mean weeks. It does mean 7 days, okay? But not in the context of chapter 9. And so you have to go, well, how do you know that? And so that's what I'm going to try to explain. Because 490 days does not give enough time for the 6 events listed in 924 to occur. So up here we have these 6 events, and we're going to be talking about those shortly. And the 490 days does not fit the context of the 6 events listed there. Also, days to years is the reason for Israel's 40 years in the wilderness. Oh. Do you remember that? Do you remember when they went out and spied up the land and all that for 40 days, right? And then they got punished for 40 years for 40 days of wrongdoing, okay? That's in Numbers 14. Also, days to years in Ezekiel 4 and Leviticus 25 were 7 Sabbaths of years equals 49 years. Also, 49 days does not give enough time for finishing the transgression, ending sin, atoning for sin. But 70 times 7 years, 409 years, does give enough time for these 6 events to occur. Because all these events listed here in 925 have to occur during that 70-week period. And for all of those to occur within 490 days is kind of like, well, no, it's not going to happen. Okay? These future 490 years go along with the past 490 years of Sabbath missed by Israel. Remember I explained that a few minutes ago? 490 years, not do the Sabbath year every 7th year. So you're punished for 70. This is the mirror image of that. For 70 years is the decree, or 70 weeks of years, which comes out to 490 years. So 70 times 7 is 490 years. Which is the reason for the 70-year exile in the first place. And we just read that 2 Chronicles a couple pages ago. So question 4, how else do we know the weeks mean years? Read Genesis 29:27. Does someone want to read that for us? Genesis 29:27.
Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years.
Okay, so if you remember this story, remember that in Genesis that Jacob had to serve Laban so many years for his wives, right? And so here he says you have to serve another week. Well, if you find out that that week that's mentioned in that verse wasn't 7 days, it was 7 years. Because later on it even says that Jacob served Laban 20 years. Remember? 7 years for his first wife, 7 years for his second wife. That's 14, right? And then the other 6 was all that thing about the sheep and all of that. You know, Laban said, yeah, you just serve me a little bit longer and all that. And then Jacob says, okay, I'll just take all the black and the ugly sheep. And then there's all that story transpires. But my point of this is to show that sometimes in the Old Testament, when they say weeks or week, they mean years, not days. Where week means 7 years for Jacob, he labored 7 years for Rachel. Week in Hebrew is the same word in Daniel 9 and Genesis 27. So let's move on. Next page. So here we're going to get into the Daniel 9:24 is these 6 aspects. Okay? So all of these have to occur within this 70-week period. All of these have to occur within a 490-year period, according to Daniel 9, verse 24. So the first of the 70-week decree, it says, what needs to happen? When will the finish of the transgression for Daniel's people and Daniel's city, Jerusalem? To bring an end or finish the deliberate rebellion and disregard of the Lord by Israel will be within the 70 weeks or 490 years, okay? So that part of Daniel 24 has to occur. So has Israel's sin or transgression finished yet? No. Just go to the second one. When will there be an end of sin for Daniel's people and Daniel's city, Jerusalem? And I keep saying Daniel's people and Daniel's city, Jerusalem, because that's the context of 9:24, right? We're talking about those two things. And it says in Jeremiah 31, I will forgive their iniquity and their sin I'll remember no more. Remember, that's the new covenant. So in Jeremiah it says, I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. So we could read that whole thing, and that's even quoted in Hebrews 8 and Hebrews 10 too, that same new covenant. So has that happened yet? No, he hasn't. He hasn't forgiven their iniquity and their sin and remembered no more. He's still remembering their sin right now, okay? Because most of Israel is all turned away from him. Also, Romans 11, all Israel will be saved, just as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion, okay? He will remove ungodliness from Jacob. This is my covenant with them when I take away their sin. So if you read Romans 11 and those verses, has that happened yet? Has he come and taken all their sin? And that happens at the time the Lord comes. It happens at the time the Lord comes is when all Israel's sin is taken away. Fourth, when will there be brought in everlasting righteousness for Daniel's people in Jerusalem? Has that happened yet? No, I don't think so. Jeremiah 23, it talks about the Lord our righteousness. Jesus will reign in the millennial kingdom with Israel saved. Okay? He brings in everlasting righteousness for Israel, for Jerusalem, for Daniel's people. Okay? Fifth one there. When will vision and prophecy be sealed up for Daniel's people in Jerusalem? Vision and prophecy will be sealed up when all prophecy is fulfilled in the future end time, when Jesus comes the second time and brings in the millennial and eternal kingdoms. Number 6 there, when will the most holy place sanctuary be anointed for Daniel's people in Jerusalem? Anointed to concentrate, declare sacred, or make holy. In this case, a sanctuary, holy place, or temple. Has that happened yet? They don't even have a temple. You got to have a temple. Israel doesn't have a temple yet. For a holy place sanctuary to be anointed, Israel must have a temple. But Solomon's temple was destroyed in 586 BC, and Ezra's temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Therefore, Israel has no temple for almost 2,000 years, but Ezekiel, who was in Babylon like Daniel, prophesied of a future temple in Ezekiel 41 through 46, often called Ezekiel's temple. So this is what I'm thinking. There's going to be this temple. It's not here yet, right? But when you talk about temple, there's a handful of temples. I mean, you got to kind of talk about them all, and it gets kind of complicated. But basically, there'll be a temple at the time of the Antichrist built by the Jews. Because, like it says in Matthew 24, the abomination of desolation stands up in the temple. Well, to stand up in the temple, you got to have one, right? And you don't have one, don't have one. Then what about the next temple? How does that do? Well, in Zechariah, it even says, he will build the temple in that time. I'd have to take you that verse and show you all that, but the Messiah will build the future temple in the millennial kingdom, called as Ezekiel's temple. Messiah will build that one. It won't be built by human hands. The sixth one, when will the most, we just read that one. Finally, in conclusion, all 6 aspects of the work decree, the 70-week decree, all of these must occur. They're all prophetic. They must occur because Gabriel said it, because he got the message from the Lord and he's given it to Daniel. Daniel's writing it down and we're reading it, okay? So that's the progression. All 6 aspects listed in Daniel 9:24 will be initiated and carried out by the Lord. They are unconditional. There isn't, well, if you're really good that year, I'll do it for you. There's none of that. It's unconditional. These 6 events then anticipate the establishment of Israel's promised covenant and prophesied millennial kingdom under the authority of Israel's promised king, her Messiah. These 6 things summarize God's whole program to bring the nation of Israel the blessings he promised them through his covenants. He promised. The Abrahamic covenant promises it. The Davidic covenant promises. The new covenant promises. The one I even left out is the Deuteronomy covenant, which is the end of Deuteronomy in chapters 29 and 30. So let's move on. Verse 25, Gabriel's still speaking here. So you are to know and discern. Know and discern. It's real specific. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Jerusalem, will be built again with plaza and moat even in times of distress. So 70 weeks and 49 years would begin with the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. That's what it says in verse 25. So this is important because if you don't understand what it says in verse 25, you're not going to know which decree to pick. Okay? Okay, so we're going to talk about these 4 decrees because some people go, so I read some books on prophecy, go, well, it's the first decree. And other people go, no, it's the second. No, it's the third. No, it's the fourth. So I'm going to show you which one I think it is and why I think it is. Okay? So the 4 decrees are all made by Persian rulers. All Persian kings made the decrees. Not Babylonians and not Greeks or anybody else. Okay? The first decree was King Cyrus in 538 BC. This decree was to build him a house or temple in Jerusalem, not to build Jerusalem itself. Then the enemies, Israel's enemies, stopped their building until King Darius I. Okay? The second decree was of King Darius I, and the temple was completed after 5 years in 515 BC. But this decree was to build him a house, a temple in Jerusalem, and not to build Jerusalem itself. Then 57 years later, Ezra returns to Jerusalem a second time. Third decree was the decree of King Artaxerxes Longimanus in 457, but this decree was to build him a house, temple, and not not build Jerusalem. For the first 3 are not building Jerusalem. And if you're familiar with the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah, what happens in the book of Ezra? Book of Ezra, Ezra goes, and it's stretched out because of all these problems and everything. He builds a temple. But he doesn't build the city. He doesn't build the walls around the city. He doesn't build the other buildings within the city. He only builds the temple, which was really important. But the book of Ezra is all about building the temple. Then what's the book of Nehemiah about? He goes back and builds the walls and the gates in the city. The fourth decree was also by King Artaxerxes in 444 BC. Then the king sent Nehemiah to Jerusalem to rebuild the city gates and walls in Nehemiah chapter 2. Then the city gates and walls were completed in 444 BC. Remember, he did it in days. I mean, everything was been a problem to get the work done because all these people are going, oh no, don't let them build the city because they'll rise up and fight against us, you know? And so if you read all those books, you'll find out how that all transpires. So this decree was the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem in our text 925. Therefore, in March, April 444 BC, you notice how particular I'm getting here about the date, is the beginning of the 70 weeks or the beginning of the 490 years. I'm getting very particular here, okay? The temple was built in the book of Ezra, and the city and walls were built in the book of Nehemiah, like I just said, okay? And the decree says in 925, the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah. No mention of the temple, it's the city itself. And plus, as we'll see, that fits better how the 490 years works out through history, especially with the death of Christ. Daniel 9:25 there at the bottom, that's repeated what's at the top of the page. So in 9:20 it says, it's how long will it be until Messiah, the anointed one, the prince? So in our verse 25 there, it says, until the prince. Now it doesn't say, which it says a couple verses later, that the Messiah will be cut off. It just says, until Messiah the Prince, until Jesus, okay? Till that time. If the 490 years begins in 444 BC, like we mentioned, then 449 years plus 434 years would be 483 years until Messiah the Prince. Therefore, 443 BC plus 483 should take us to the time of Messiah, right? I mean, that's what it says. But 444 BC minus 483 years is 39 AD, which takes us about 39 AD after the death of Messiah. Oh, it doesn't work. Bummer. Doesn't work. Therefore, this cannot be until Messiah the Prince. But it has to be, right? Because that's the prophecy. How can 444 BC to 33 AD be the time of the Messiah and be equal to 483 years? How can that be? Let's talk about it. So, this is a key point here. If I asked everybody in the room how many days in a year. Everybody go, well, 365. And somebody go, no, there's 365 and a quarter days in a year. And then you get the real scientific guy. He would say 365.251 days in a year, okay? If you go like on Wikipedia and stuff, you could find out about some of this stuff in great detail and how that all works. So I want to show you why I think they're talking about 360-day years and not 365-day years. And here's why. In Noah's flood started on the second month of the 17th day of the month, and the end of the 150 days was on the 7th month, 17th day of the month. This means 150 days for 5 months. 150 days for 5 months. So you take 150 days and divide it by 5, and that's a 30-day month, okay? In Noah's flood, way back in Genesis that Moses wrote. And that gives you 360-day years. And you're going, well, that's just one place. Let's see, we got another place here. 360 days in Daniel and Revelation. In Daniel 7:25, the Antichrist will be given time and a half, or 3.5 years. So now we're starting to get into this. Let me see, days, years, how do we figure this out? Okay. Revelation 12:14, the woman will be given time and a half. And that's 3.5 years, and we'll see why that's so. Revelation 11, the nations will be given 42 months. In Revelation 11:3, the two witnesses will be given 1,260 days. The Antichrist will be given 42 months, or 3.5 years. So here's our conclusion. Therefore, if 3.5 years equals 42 months, which equals 1,260 days, then 1,260 days divided by 42 months equals 30-day months. And 30-day months times 12 equals 360-day years. So most scholars, when you read their commentaries, they talk about, and they might label a little different, but usually they'll say, well, prophetic years in the Bible are 360 days. And you're like, well, I don't want them to be. Sorry, that's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. But that does cause great confusion because everybody wants to do the 365-day years. Okay. Moving down the page, 483 years from Artaxerxes' decree to Messiah's triumphal entry into Jerusalem. So in this same verse 25, there will be 7 weeks, 49 years, and 62 weeks, or if you add them together, 483 years. How can 440 BC to 333 AD be equal to 483 years? Remember, we said, well, that's to 39 AD. These years are prophetic years consisting of 300 days, 60 days each, based on that thinking there. Determining prophetic year days within 483 years. So you have to do some math here. Some people don't like math. Sorry. But you got to do some math, but it's just addition, subtraction, and multiplication, okay? 483 prophetic years times 360 days prophetic years equals 173,800 prophetic days within 483 years. Simple math, right? You just multiply 483 times 360, and you get the 173,880. Now, we want to determine when in calendar days the 483 years, or those days, begin. The fourth decree was by Artaxerxes, we read, and issued in or on the 20th year of his reign. The first month of the year in the Jewish calendar was Nisan. Oh. Now, in Nehemiah, the first time that he's in the 20th year is in the month of Nisan, and that's the Jewish month, which is equal to our March, April. And since no day is given, it's reasonable to assume the first day of Nisan, or Nisan 1. Hence, in the Julian calendar, that's our calendar basically, the corresponding date would be March 5th, 444 BC. This is the day of Artaxerxes' decree was issued to restore and rebuild Jerusalem in March 5th. So we know for sure it's when those Nisan months range, but my assumption is on the first of Nisan, and I'll try to explain why as we go on. Setting calendar date of Messiah's triumphal entry and Messiah's death on Passover. Now, if the Passover was on Friday, April 3rd, 6 days before the Passover was on Sunday, right? Okay. The next day was Monday. Then the triumphal entry occurred on March 30th, 33 AD. So if you went to those passages in John 12, you could see how I set the day of the triumphal entry. Now, many, many places you go and people say, well, no, the triumphal entry is on Sunday. No, it's on Sunday. It's on Sunday. But I'm telling you, it was on Monday, at least according to John chapter 12 there. Determining calendar years from the decree to Messiah's triumphal entry. From Artaxerxes' decree to Messiah's triumphal entry, 444 BC to 33 AD equals 477 years. But you never count the 0 year. So there isn't a year that goes, okay, year 0, January 1st, year 0, January 2nd. So when you do that, and all the scholars agree on this isn't just something unusual. You just have to be careful when you're going from BC to AD that you don't count a year called 0, okay? So there's no year 0 with January, February, March, April, May. It starts on year 1, right? So that gives you 476 calendar years. I know this math is kind of complicated. You probably have to go back and look at this over and over and ask me some more questions, but determining exact calendar years or days in 476 years by using solar year days. Oh no, now we're going to get more complicated. From Alexander's decree to Messiah's triumphal entry, 476 calendar years times 365.24219,879 days equals 173,855 days. Wow, look at the decimal places on that. So if you look up on the internet and you say, how long is a solar day? So what is a solar day? It takes exactly to all those decimal places for the Earth to rotate 1 revolution. It's calculating it exactly, okay? It's not approximately now, because our calendar, everything in our calendar is approximate, right? Because we have leap years and February 29th and all of those things, okay? Determining days from the decree, March 5th, 444 BC to Messiah's triumphal entry, first take those 173,855 days, then add the 25 days from March 5th to March 30th. So that number of days plus 25 days equals 173,880 days until Messiah the Prince, which is in our verse 925. Okay? Then the 173,880 days agrees with our starting point of 173,880 days for the March 30 triumphal entry. Then 5 days later, the Messiah will be cut off and killed. So what I'm saying is I think you can calculate exact in a nutshell without doing the math, okay? In a nutshell, Daniel's prophecy says there will be so much time, so many years until the time of the Messiah. And secondly, in another verse, then the verses next down, Messiah will be cut off. So once you say Messiah is cut off, those dates have to work out, okay? They have to work out. So let's go to the next page. Okay, so my conclusion is this. 173,855 days actually transpired between March 5th, 444 BC, when the decree was given, to March 30th, 33 AD, which is the triumphal entry. That means Messiah's triumphal entry until Messiah was on Monday, March 30th, and Messiah was cut off or killed on Friday. And I got it, when I get it in this book, it's like, well, no, the triumphal entry is on Sunday. No, Jesus died on Saturday. No, Jesus died on Thursday. No, Jesus died. So I'm making all these assumptions, and I can show you how I can back them up, but we can't go into all that with this class because of the sake of time. So I wanted to show you here, there's the 69 weeks. Remember, 7 weeks and 62 weeks, which equals those many years, 49 and 434. Adds up to 483 years, okay? That's what we're talking about. Then down at the bottom, you see at the left, it says March 5th and then March 30th and April 3rd. If you pick those dates using these calculations, it comes out exactly to the day when Jesus was cut off, when Jesus was crucified, okay? And it also deals with the triumphal entry, okay? And then there's the church age, which we haven't talked about yet, which some people call gap, and then some people say, well, I don't, that gap idea, I don't like that gap idea, okay? Do you realize that every single prophecy in the Bible has a gap in it? What do you mean by that? What I mean is it has a delay before it's fulfilled, right? Whether it's 3 days, like for Joseph that we talked about earlier, or it's 100 years, or it's 1,000 years, or Isaiah's prophecy in 7:14 of the Christ was 700 years later. So prophecy isn't based on, oh, it's got to be fulfilled soon. It's based on, it's got to be fulfilled, and it's fulfilled when the Lord says it's going to be fulfilled, okay? And we're getting more of this part on the right here, this 1 week. We're going to be talking more about that, which is the Antichrist, which overlaps what we studied last time in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. So Daniel 26 and verse 26, there will be 7 years or 49 years or 62 weeks. Remember, we read that before in verse 25. Then verse 26, then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. Well, it already said till the coming of the Messiah in the previous verse, right? And now it's getting real specific until the cut off of the Messiah. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end will be war. Desolations are determined. When will the Messiah be cut off or killed? After the 62 weeks and the 7 weeks, or after 69 weeks, the Messiah will be, or which is equivalent to 430 years, when the Messiah will be cut off. This agrees with the 480 years until the Messiah, the Prince. This means that Messiah's triumphal entry until Messiah was on, now I wrote Sunday there, but I think I meant Monday there, March 30th. And Messiah was cut off or killed on Friday. Question 2, who are the people of the prince who is to come that destroy the city? Well, we know from history the people who destroyed Jerusalem are the Romans in 70 AD. Like, everybody agrees with that. Every single commentator agrees with that. The people are the Romans, the Roman Empire of Daniel 2, and the fourth beast of Daniel 7 that we studied last time. Therefore, Israel has had no temple for about 2,000 years, but Ezekiel, who was in Babylon like Daniel, prophesied of a future temple in Ezekiel 41 through 46, often called Ezekiel's temple that we talked about before. So who is the prince who's to come? Now, when you say prince, everybody's going, well, is that Jesus or who is it? It's just like, well, prince is kind of a designation of a leader and all that. So even Satan's called prince. He's the prince of the power of the air, right? Right? And then Jesus is the prince who is to come. Oh, so it's Jesus, right? So you have to look at the context to see which prince is talking about. Who is the prince to come? The people who destroyed Jerusalem were the Romans in 70 AD, but the prince who is to come is the Antichrist, the little horn, the beast that we studied in Revelation, in Daniel 7, and also referred to in Revelation 11 and 13. So let's move on. We got some good charts here. See if we can get through them. So first we have a chart on just the 483 years, okay? So I put this part in because I want you to see how it fits into history. Remember I had this before where there's the exile and then the Babylonian Empire, and then the Medo-Persian Empire, and then the Greek Empire, and then the Roman Empire. Well, how do I know that? Because when we studied Daniel chapter 2, remember those are the four empires that it explains in Daniel chapter 2. Historical, real empires and those dates, okay? This is how the 69 weeks, not the 70th week, just the first 69 weeks, the 483 years, lines up with history, lines up with those four kingdoms of the statue, of Nebuchadnezzar's statue, okay? Then at the end of those 483 years, you see where I have the cross there, and it says Messiah will be cut off. Remember, we just read that, right? He'll be cut off in the middle of the Roman Empire there. And we know it's the Roman Empire because at the time of Christ it was the Roman Empire, right? We know that, right? We know that. Everybody knows it was the Romans there. And then after that, in 70 AD, so if I'm saying Christ was crucified in 33 AD, and some people go, well, I think he was crucified in 30 AD and all that, and we could talk about the details of that, but I could show you why I think it's 33. So anyway, this gives you kind of a big picture of all that. And so this time in Luke 21, they call it the age of the Gentiles. And what the heck is that? The age of the Gentiles are when the Gentiles are in control. Do you see? They're dominant over Israel. Israel isn't autonomous. Israel isn't reigning with their own kingdom. See, they're dominated by the Gentiles. Let's go to the next chart. This is just about the 49 years. So again, we're establishing history here, and we're stretching out the Medo-Persian Empire. Remember, everything happens, the last part of the book of Daniel is all about the Medo-Persian Empire because Babylon's been conquered, like we talked about. And then there's the time of Ezra. You see how I have it there towards the top, and then the time of Nehemiah. So the time of Ezra was approximately, let's say, 23 years, and he had all the problems. Remember, he goes to build the temple, and the people complain, and then they tell him to stop building, and then there's a leg of time, and then he goes back and he builds the temple some more, and then he doesn't quite finish, and then he comes back again, and he finally builds the whole temple. You read the book of Ezra, it tells you that. Then the time of Nehemiah, where we keep saying that the fourth decree is, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, who was during that time, okay? And then you even notice how I wrote sideways there. You can see where Daniel and Ezekiel are prophesying. And then later on, you see Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Well, a couple years ago, I did the book of Zechariah in this class. Okay? And it's interesting because when you read the prophets in the Old Testament, you read them through, and they're all out of order. They're like someone took a deck of cards and just kind of went like that, and there's no order to it, okay? But you read Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, that is really late in the Old Testament, 400 and 500 years before Christ was born. But they're not at the end of the Old Testament. They're not in my Bible at the pages at the end, okay? So you have to sort those out and try to understand those things, okay? Finally, we get to this third chart. So now we're combining the 483 years with the 7 years. Remember, 483 years is the 69 weeks of Daniel, and the last 7 years is the 70th week of Daniel. Because everything has to occur, right? So the first 69 weeks, you see how we laid it out there and overlaps with history like the last slide did there, okay? And those dates there. Then the last week, see, I even have the prophets, I poked them in there so you kind of see where those, what I call those is post-exilic prophets, meaning after the exile prophets, okay? And then you have the last week that hasn't occurred yet. It hasn't occurred yet. And that's the time of the Antichrist, when he makes the firm covenant for 7 years. He makes a firm covenant for 7 years. And after 3.5 years, he stops sacrifice and all that. And that talks about it in Matthew 24. Remember, he stands up in the temple, and then other verses talk about how he stops sacrifice. It's all the Antichrist. None of that's happened yet, okay? So down at the bottom, Daniel 9:20, and he, the prince who's to come, will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week, for 7 years. But in the middle of the week, he, the Antichrist, will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And this is even mentioned again in Daniel 11 and Daniel 12 about this abomination of desolation, they sometimes call him. Remember, he's got all these names. It's like Jesus. He's got all these names. Abomination of desolation, the little horn, all the different ones. He has all these things, and they come to fruition. So we won't be able to finish the last of these, but I'll just explain what's on here. So this is a further explanation of this 927 here at the bottom. Talking about Daniel 27, so you might want to read through that, and explains it in great detail. And he'll stop sacrifice at that future time. And then the very last page is just giving you some background into the Antichrist according to Paul. So if you want to know about the Antichrist, you want to at least read those verses. If you read those verses in this last page of the notes here, you'll find out a huge amount of information about the Antichrist, which is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 there. And I've even lined it out. So, and there at the bottom of page 12, the summary of the Antichrist in the 70th week. The 1 week or the 70th week is clearly the end of the age when the Antichrist is revealed. He makes a 7-year covenant with Israel. Then after 3.5 years, he breaks that covenant. At that time, he stands and seats himself in the temple of God, declaring himself to be God, which is the abomination of desolation and the apostasy. It's called by both of those names. He will come with power and signs and false wonders with all the deception of wickedness. This deception is towards those who perish or towards unbelievers. He, the one, the Antichrist, who's coming is according to the activity of Satan and the dragon. In Revelation 12, it says that. The Antichrist comes in accordance with Satan and the dragon. Of course, this sounds very much like the book of Revelation that we're going to go back to shortly. Okay? So what's hard is that we're in Revelation, then we kind of Daniel, go back to Revelation because we're trying to build a foundation. So I'll end with prayer. Father, I thank you for this time and help us understand these prophecies, not just put things in the prophecy that aren't there, but understand them in the way you intended them to be understood, not only by Daniel, but by us many, many hundreds of years later, so we can understand not only what happened during the time of Christ and being cut off there and be killed, but also that future 70th week or 7-year period where the Antichrist comes on the scene, and how that all fits together, Father, and help us see how further that is relevant with our study of the book of Revelation. In Jesus' name, amen.